I'm surprised so many people survived till now, so thank you for being here. This is, we have 3 talks back to back, all around workflows, because that's been one of the big asks from a lot of people is that, how do we handle workflows in cases of, APIs, but now it becomes even more interesting with agents, and we want to do workflows with agents. So that's how we've kind of designed it to have 3 kind of use cases. For those of you who are familiar with Arazzo, that's a relatively new specification from OpenAPI about basically workflows. How do you describe workflows? And obviously, it has multiple angles to it. One is around essentially to be able to describe a workflow in terms of how these APIs need to be used together as an architect or as an author. How do you envision people to use these APIs? But it also has other interesting use cases, not just from a documentation and communication point of view, but also from testing actual orchestration of your APIs itself. So you can use the Arazzo specification to orchestrate the workflows. It also has interesting implications in terms of if you're building let's think of an app, right, which interacts with a series of APIs, some internal, some external, some built, some not yet ready, but I want to see the whole experience, then you could technically use Arazzo as a specification and then mock that whole entire interaction, right? And so those are the use cases, but then in the agentic world, you can also use this to orchestrate an agentic workflow as well, right? So this particular talk is more introductory. The subsequent talks will kind of build a little bit more on it. But what I'm going to demonstrate is I'm going to take this use case, which is very hard to see on the screen. So I'm going to, this is the only slide I have, by the way, so that's the thank you slide. So I'm going to switch now, and I'm going to jump in and show you this a little bit more blown up. And we'll talk about how do you orchestrate this particular workflow, right? So what is the workflow? I have a front end for backend service. Let's see if this thing works. Yeah, so I have a front end for backend service that basically talks to a location API. So you're requesting a login credentials, you're passing some credentials to this API. It's returning you back where the user is. And depending on that, then you're making a call to the order API, which then, so this is basically get all the products available for this location. And then that returns you a list of products. There are 2 possibilities, depending on whether the zone that in which you live. If there are products available, it will return, or it can also return an empty list. If you do have products, then you can place an order, and then placing an order usually is a fairly complicated process, so you want to do that asynchronously. And then whenever it is, so you're going to put a message on place order topic. Whenever it's done, it's going to publish a message back on this another topic, which is what then gets picked up. And then you can get the status of your order and see, what all is the price and other details on that order, right? So this is kind of the workflow that I'm going to try and take today as an example. Why is this interesting, right, first of all? Is this a common kind of a use case that you guys see at work, right? Like, till now with Arazzo specification, or technically even till now, the specification itself is not updated. We are in the process working with the committee to update the specification itself. So till now, what you could do with Arazzo specification is only stitch the RESTful APIs, right? But as any one of us who work in large complicated use cases, we know that sync and async is very interchangeably used in workflows. So this is technically the very first talk ever delivered on showing how sync and async can be combined together and work together. It's yet to be finalized and published as a specification, but we are very close to getting that done, hopefully before the next conference. That's how just committees work. All right, so let's look at this particular workflow in an action. How does this look in Arazzo, and how do we even create this, right? So let's go here. I'm going to quickly launch Specmatic here. Let's see, that came up. Just going to switch to here. Let's just refresh. Okay. So when you launch Specmatic Studio, one of the things you would see is author a workflow. And what you would be able to do is, let's say I'm going to say order workflow, right? And then I should be able to essentially open, here's a workflow. There's a set of specification. This is what you're looking here is a async API specification. Actually, let me first introduce the async API specification. So we're looking at the same workflow. How many of you are familiar with the async API specification itself? Some of you probably would have met folks out there as well. So they've been doing fantastic work on the ability to define different kinds of protocols. So it's protocol agnostic. So you could be using Kafka, Google PubSub, MQTT, whatever of your choice. And you can essentially define like what are the channels, what are the topics that you have, and then what is the message payload within that, right? So that's how you capture the stuff in a async API specification. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with an open API specification, or what used to be called Swagger back in the day, right? So in this particular demo, we have the location, the one on the right top corner in the diagram that I showed, and then order service, which is the this thing, and then we have the sync and async version of the order service. So that's what I'm kind of quickly doing here is I'm just opening up all these things that are available inside the specification, just exploding them. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to quickly try and pull some of these and create a workflow that we are interested in creating. Let me quickly switch back. What did happen? There we go. Sorry, I just going to expand this once more. And let's get the location guy pulled up. So this is get user details or get user location. After that, I'm going to try and essentially get the list of products that are available in this location. Try to place an order for this location. Let's expand this a little bit. Once I place the order, then I'm going to wait to receive this. And then finally, I'm going to be able to get my order details, right? So this is place order. This is, let's say, receive order. If I can type. And then let's just stitch this workflow together, right? So this is essentially a very visual way for us to be able to stitch a workflow together. All you're trying to do is look at your specification, look at the operations within the specification, just drag those operations in the way you would want to stitch the workflow together. And that's pretty much it. So let's just quickly do auto layout. It'll give you in a nice cleaner way. And let's just rename this to order workflow. And what I've done at this stage is this is really not the workflow, but this is the intent of my workflow, right? This is the order in which I would want certain operations to take place. Why did I say this is not the workflow? This is just the intent of the workflow. Any idea what's the difference between this that I'm trying to highlight? Fantastic, right? So that's one part of it. What else? Okay. Good for the business user. But this isn't like when you make a call, you could have potentially different, like we talked about one in that thing, when you get an empty, then you want to do something. When you get a valid value, you want to do something else. Depending on the statuses, you may want to retry, you may want to do other kinds of things, right? So that's what makes a workflow, right? Like that's the interesting piece. This is more of the intent of what I want to do, right? Now, you could say that once I've done this, now I'm going to go open up Arazzo specification and handwrite all of these things to fill in all those details, but life is too short for that. So I'm going to click a button called Generate Workflow, right? And what that has done for us, which is hard to see on the screen a little bit, but essentially what that has done for us is it's essentially looked at when I make a get user detail call, what is the success criteria? The success criteria is I need a 200 response back. Once I get a 200 response back, I go down this path. But if I don't get a 200 response back, then I go down all the way, and essentially that would be ending the workflow. Like basically that's the end because in this case. But you could obviously say, hey, I want to retry if this doesn't happen. Or maybe I want to do something else, right? But in this case, you want to end this. And you would then say, okay, if I made this call and if the array is empty, how did this guy figure out that the array can be empty or not, right? That's based on it's looking ahead on what the next guy needs and then compute backwards saying what are the parameters that needs to be present and create the success case, right? Like this is typically where you would be sitting and writing all of this, but that's what we're trying to eliminate, where you just express the intent and get the rest of the things kind of auto-created for you, right? So right now this has just visually helped us take the intent, extrapolate it into a workflow, right? Now, you may want to tweak this workflow. You may not be happy. You may play around with this. So you would go through a few iterations on top of it. And at the stage where you feel you're happy, this workflow is fairly representative of exactly your business and technical requirements both, right? Like you said, we start with the business. We added the technical aspects onto this. Now we are happy with both parts of it. Now we want to capture this into an Arazzo specification, right? We want to go back to a standard that anybody else can understand, right? So now I'm just going to click this and that basically exported Arazzo specification for me, okay? Now this is how an Arazzo specification looks, right? So the Arazzo specification has a few interesting sections, right? Let's collapse these sections to start with so we can all understand. So it has a source section, which basically says from where am I referring to these operations, right? What is the source of my specifications? So I've listed a set of specification. These are some of the new things that we've added. So we also say what is the type of the specification. It's an open API specification and a sync API specification or something else. And then we have 5 minutes left. That's unfair. I think it's a 45-minute session. I'm pretty much to the end of it. And then you have a list of essentially inputs that this guy needs. So it's looked across all the different steps. What are all the inputs that you would require? And it's essentially pulled all of those inputs here. And it's kind of defined what is the data types and so forth. And then this is the interesting piece where you have the steps, right? Which is what we pulled. And each of the steps then have what are the parameters that go into the request, what are the payload, what is the success criteria, what's the output of this which is required, like you said, to the next guy, and so forth, right? So that's what an Arazzo specification represents, including things like timeout and stuff like that, okay? So that's, again, my intent is not to go through every line and explain. That's understood. Like this is what the specification is. And this is, again, the same visual representation with a little bit of color coding to kind of highlight what is a sync step, what is an async step. And so now I have a Arazzo specification, right? Great. What can I do with it? Run it, right? That's what we wanted to do. So what I'm going to do is what we call as a closed loop test. So I'm going to run this as a mock, okay? So with just that, I'm going to say, okay, take this specification and run this mock. So I've started up a mock at this stage, right? So when I say I started up a mock, what does that mean? I effectively take each of those specifications that are behind it and generate the respective mocks for it, so that now if, let's say, I was building a UI, I could start interacting through the whole workflow, right? The entire workflow can be simulated. So I have, as you can see, a workflow is running, and now I can switch here and I can start running tests against this. When I say start running tests against this, what does this mean? I'm taking the specification and I'm generating tests from the specification, which will start firing API calls or sending messages onto the queue. And because I have a mock running, that will start responding. So that's what we call the closed loop test. Of course, you can separate these out and then start using them independently, right? If you had a set of services that were running, you could run the workflow against the actual service and you'd see the whole thing working. If you didn't have the services and you want the consumer, you could just take the Arazzo spec and run it as a mock. So you decouple the two to independently develop, okay? So I'm going to select, so this is all running at this stage on Docker and Kafka locally. So I'm selected those and I'm just going to click hit run, right? And what you can see is it basically went through and ran the whole thing. So let's visualize this a little bit. So that's the workflow that we were showing. You would see, like, this is the first case that essentially went down this path, which is highlighted. The ones that are dotted is what didn't get covered when I ran this test, right? And so this is kind of the path it took to complete. And you can obviously, kind of select any of these guys to see what happened. There's also another empty array scenario that we talked about, right? So it's also generated a workflow for you and exercised that workflow, which went down the empty path and kind of finished over here, right? So it exercised the two scenarios for us. If I quickly switch back to the mock, you'd also be able to see on the mock certain things have got covered and a similar workflow orchestration on what happened on the mock side. So you can see both next to each other, right? Like what happened on the test side, what happened on the mock side, okay? So that is pretty much the closed loop test. So I have the specification right here. The specification has a set of inputs, which is what it's playing around with. You can always tweak this because your database may have something else and so forth. You have an ability to run the mock. You have an ability to run the tests, right? So that's kind of a quick demonstration of what this can do. And then I can come to my last slide. Cool, that's it. That was the 45-minute session. All right, questions. I have time for questions.
Yeah, you have questions time.
Okay,
finished
cool.
1 minute early. So, yeah.
There are other folks who will do better job than me in terms of explaining the Arazzo specification. Mine is more of a marketing talk.
Yeah, few basic thing. I mean, maybe like it's supported, but you've shown multiple APIs. Usually the APIs will be hosted in different places. They have different authentication mechanism. So I hope that is somehow supported here, like the API one or set of APIs, or the API from one set of server is having this type of authentication. This will be the token. That is my first query. Second one is that, is the SOAP is supported?
SOAP is supported in the toilet.
restroom. I mean,
so we don't,
it's not like
it's a very fair ask. It's a very fair ask. We don't support SOAP yet. Arazzo specification itself does not support SOAP. So hence we don't support SOAP.
Vistal is gone.
Vistal, it's not gone. It's not supported yet, right? But, we can always make a case for having support for Vistals or SOAP in Arazzo specification, but that is not part of Arazzo specification as of now. Even async was not. We have contributed that into this and going through the process of getting that. And then once we do that, maybe you can do that with SOAP.
Two more
First,
small things, like one.
I'll also answer your first question around the authentication, right? So when you say that if you have two services, both having different authentication mechanism, in your API specification, the open API specification, you would have defined the authentication scheme, from where you're basically going to authorize, like where you're going to get the token and stuff like that. So, that's like underlying in the specification itself. So we pick up those things, get the token, and make the request with the token, right?
Two more small things. Like say my API 1, API 2, okay, I can do the connectivity, but sometimes it requires transformation also. Like your structure of the first or output of the first need cannot be acceptable as is. I cannot define each and every variable, and very nice tool that you have it doing the very well linking. But still sometimes you need to transform the object, maybe in XML. I mean, please don't cross question me, but yeah, you need to transform.
You already
You need to transform, okay. So in that case, will this platform supports customization before generating the Arazzo output?
No, so the idea of Arazzo specification is not to do transformations. The idea of Arazzo specification is to allow you to stitch something that you already believe works well, but you could prove that it doesn't work well, because that's also often the case when customers think that, you know, this should work together, and when they stitch together, they realize the data type is different, or there's some other constraint that is not being honored. So it'll help you discover those kinds of mismatches, the platform, and maybe fix the specification itself, right? And allow you to then make that easily interop, rather than having a transformation in between. At least that's the idea.
Probably last question. In the Kafka queue, I mean, say you said that it may come in future, but say sometimes we have a ask of the topic and subscription model. That same response would not go to all. It's
Sure.
filter it out and then pass it out. Any plan of that in future, or
So-
it's not meant for it?
It is. So in async itself, you have multiple, you know, communication patterns, right? So you can have a request reply, you can have a pub sub, you can have a subscribe kind of a thing. So all of those are supported in the underlying async API specification itself. We are just leveraging that, right? So we are not doing any heavy lifting here. This is mostly just an orchestration layer. So whatever is supported under hood, right, that's anyway available here. Okay. I think you
Take
had a
one
question.
and then we can close because
I can make way for the next speaker to at least start getting set up.
So in your workflow, if there was an array of items and you needed to loop over it and try to do some tests, is that possible
Yes,
in here?
Arazzo specification supports like a retry mechanism or a loop kind of a mechanism. No, so let me not jump ahead. So loop, there are two kinds of loops that people talk about, right? One is a loop where you're retrying till a success criteria, right? Like retry this till some criteria is met. Like, so I would call that as a loop, and that's supported in Arazzo specification. There's another kind of loop, which is I make an API call, I get a list back, and I want to loop through each element in the list, right? That's not supported by Arazzo specification at this point. We have, so we're talking to the folks there, because that's something that's come up quite a bit, where people want the ability to loop through things and stuff like that. So that's not supported yet.
And just last one, is there any visualization for Arazzo specification besides what we can see in Specmatic?
So Specmatic has the visualization. There are a couple of other open source tools also that have visualization for Arazzo specification, yes.
Thank you.
Cool. I'll be around if there are more questions.